Good afternoon, Chief Cadmus Delorme, Cowessess First Nation. Just want to recognize the Cowessess First Nation is where we are on Treaty 4 territory. We're in the office of our recently launched child welfare jurisdiction. This is our office, the Chief Red Bear Children's Lodge. And very proud that Cowessess has took the initiative on asserting our jurisdiction over our children in care, and I welcome you all here to Cowessess First Nation.
Hi there, I'm Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV News in Ottawa. I think over the last few months there's been a renewed focus by a lot of Canadians on Indigenous issues. And I want to know what you would like to see in the discussion over the next month before Election Day. What are some of the most important issues you believe should be on the national radar?
Thank you. Any MP that knocks on a door or asks questions, the question should be as follows. What are you going to do when it comes to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls calls to justice? And MPs, have a lot to learn, as many Canadians do. And so you don't need the answer, but that should motivate any person who wants to run for office in this country at the importance of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
I sort of asked this question to Mr. Singh earlier. Over the last few years, we've heard lots of big promises from a variety of different leaders in elections, promising to improve the relationship between the federal government and different Indigenous communities. What is it like being on your side of things as a chief of a community who's often promised big things by leaders, and generally the deliveries of those promises doesn't come through?
Being a chief and council of a First Nation in this country, the demand is overwhelming internally. We all inherited as chief and councils, you manage poverty, mental, emotional, physical, and so trying to strengthen and motivate internally the way moving forward is you work with external. The treaty relationship, the fiduciary obligation. Give you an example, funding, fiduciary obligation of funding. Funding formulas need to change. They can't change overnight, but I encourage Government of Canada to work more quicker and provide the strength for Indigenous nations to come up with the solutions. And promises are when recorded are easy to reply back and say, you said this, I want this implemented now. But a promise from an external should be about strengthening the internal's approach, not just promising a bigger check. I would never refuse a bigger check, I'll tell you that right now. But the promises should be is, how do we stand by Cowessess, Chief and Council, to strengthen their funding formulas from their philosophy, their ideology? So, we listen, especially right now, and whatever government is in and whatever government is standing in the House, Cowessess will continue to, assure that we get what we feel we need.
In covering elections, I find there's often very big promises that are made to try to appeal to a more generic national audience. Is there something that a politician, whether local or a national leader, could do for your community that would make a difference, a noticeable difference tomorrow or next week instead of sort of longer term?
To understand the truth that Indigenous people face in this country, to understand that Indigenous people, this situation we're in was not created by us, and we all inherited this as Canadians, as First Nations people. And so to stop the accidental racism, the ignorance, and to understand that the truth hurts, the truth is real, and reconciliation can't move forward without the truth first prevailing first.
And my final question. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in afterwards. This election is obviously happening in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of talk about the fourth wave already being here. Indigenous people across the country have been at much greater risk of COVID, and especially now with the Delta variant being far more transmissible. What is there that your community or you think other communities could use to help keep their population safer, especially given the Delta variant and its transmissibility?
Funding is the denominator when it comes to the many approaches. We need to make sure we have funding available to keep our vulnerable ones at home safe, to continue promoting and marketing why the vaccines are needed. And right now in Cowessess, we're at 50% vaccinated in the community, and of eligible ones that are vaccinated. And the reason the other 50 are not vaccinated, from the feedback we've been getting, is the mistrust of the health system to Indigenous people over decades, the misconceptions. And so we're working individually with them. But, you know, the fiduciary obligation has to continue, and the Government of Canada has to allow, you know, in this per se, I'm a chief of one First Nation, allow us to come up with the solutions, and they fund it as well as, you know, work with us in our approaches.
Chief Cadmus, Alex Long, Regina Leader Post. You've spoken about a lot of things that haven't occurred overnight. You talk about how a lot of the promises made are going to take a little while. What's something in the immediate? What's something that should majority government be formed? What's something that could change overnight? What's something overnight that you would like to see change that could be?
The fiduciary obligation is always the contentious conversation, the investment in Indigenous nations. When NDP National Leader Jagmeet and I were talking, I was explaining to him the funding formulas that are 25 years fixed. 25 years ago, formulas were created, and they have never been, some have never been increased. And, you know, sometimes, you know, it takes great leaders to you know, go against the misconceptions, the ignorance, the accidental racism that, you know, it's taxpayers' dollars and this, you know, we have to have leaders in Ottawa that will push new funding formulas and invest correctly in the education systems, understanding that Indigenous communities, we will never leave our First Nation communities, but sometimes we have to against our will for better health, for better education. And so number one would be new fiscal relationships. Number two is understanding that there are rights that Indigenous people hold that are unique. You know, it puts us at a citizen plus relationship in this country. And we're not shareholders, we're rights holders that have been provided to us from our inherent right relationship. And then there's treaty obligations, you know, and it all leads back to the truth. Once Canadians understand the truth and realize that some of the misconceptions of history, of surrender, those misconceptions, that it's actually about, you know, sharing this collectively and respecting the rights holders. My long-winded answer would be to understand the relationship and to address funding formulas and to respect the governance relationship we have.
It's the third time that national media has been to Cowessess this summer, by my approximation. Do you feel as though having this attention on this site, having national media here, has been able to push any of the things that you've been calling for?
Cowessess is blessed. We have had Prime Minister Trudeau, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole, and now NDP leader Jagmeet Singh come to our community. And, you know, that is well received by Cowessess. Many critics out there would say that they're photo ops and that they are, you know, here for political gain. But, you know, to actually walk in our unmarked gravesite, to come on to Cowessess and stand in Chief Red Bear Children's Lodge, our very own child welfare jurisdiction, I do strongly believe Justin, Aaron, and Jagmeet will go back to their respected circles and understand that, you know, they did learn something from Cowessess. That, you know, Cowessess, as many of the other 600 nations across this country, are resilient people. And that, you know, we do want to be a part of this growth, but our truth needs to prevail. And coming to Cowessess, what better place than coming to a First Nation to know the reality of what many of us live day to day?
Chief, do you believe that, Bill Graveling from Canadian Press, do you believe that after a number of the announcements came out that Canadians turned off, they stopped listening?
Thank you. I go to Regina a little bit more now, and I'm 34 area, and there isn't a proud Canadian that I haven't walked into just a personal shopping trip or in a political circle where they have walked up to me when they've noticed and said, "What can I do?" So I do believe, with the amount of things going on in this world, that it's tough to focus on just the unmarked graves. I do feel that more can be done for education purposes. When the other residential schools tell their story, I don't want it to be numb to anybody. This is truth. And so, I do believe, many Canadians right now, and I've learned this in my experience, they stand by Cowessess and they stand by other Indigenous people, but they're now starting to put their shield down and say, I don't know much. What can I do? And so I do believe it takes Indigenous nations to use this moment to advise, Canadians, governments, what to do. When Cowessess would return and say, read the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls calls to justice, and implement them as soon as possible. And, governments could in return be in their campaigns, educating their voters and Canadians in general on, options they'll do to implement as well.
And just one final question. What's the situation here now? I mean, what's the next step? Or trying to identify the unmarked,
Thank you. So a month and a half ago, we announced 751 hits. And I just want to rephrase that these are not all children. This was a Roman Catholic residential gravesite. There are even non-Indigenous people buried here. We do know the mortality rate of residential schools in the early 1900s was up to 50%. So there are children in there. I am not denying that. And so right now, we are still having our technicians verify. The penetrating radar system does not pick up bodies per se. It picks up ground disturbance. And so to verify is very technical. And so we have went beyond the penetrating radar system. We've brought in cadaver dogs, which provide, they smell marrow, bone, stuff like that. Sorry to get so specific. If I'm triggering anybody watching, there is a 1-866 number to call. We have brought in drone. So, our technicians are going as quick as we can. And we've had some learning curves. And so once Cowessess Maryville Residential School is complete, which I'm thinking technically wise we should be done by September, we can provide our experience to the other residential school search committees or First Nations so that they may be able to do theirs a little more quicker than what we've learned so far.
Chief, Alison Bamford with Global News here. You have met with 3 major party leaders since the discovery of the unmarked graves. How confident are you with whoever forms government will be able to address reconciliation and other Indigenous issues and actually make improvements?
Cowessess First Nation will work with the Government of Canada as our treaty relationship, our nation to nation. I have met Jagmeet, I have met Aaron, I have met Justin. And, when the doors are closed and you sit around that table and you talk policy, you talk legislation, you talk history, everyone, was, very considerate and was very understanding. Parties have deeply embedded policies in some parties that may approach the way to reconciliation differently. And, who do I have confidence in and who do I not? That Cowessess will work with whoever's in office. And so, I do want to mention that, as the chief and as, my council that I work with that are elected and the 4,300 citizens, they're going to go mark who they feel, the 3,000 eligible voters, we have youth as well, and they'll make their personal vote. Cowessess doesn't group our votes. We allow each citizen. So, I'll personally make my vote, and, I encourage all, for Cowessess First Nation people to go and vote. And whoever gets in September 20th, we will, push the Cowessess First Nation, our strategic direction for healing, stronger economics, and prosperity with whoever's in.
Just one for me, Cole Davenport, CTV News, Regina. When you take anyone through the unmarked grave site, what goes through your mind as you would walk through that field?
I've talked about the gravesite so much in the last month and a half. It feels like it's my obligation now as a spokesperson. And, when I'm there, I take it very seriously. I make sure that it's respected, the place itself, and that the story is accurate. And one of the things that I find with the Maryville gravesite is some believe that it's all children, 751. And so I always want to make sure I respect, the true story of the history of it. I take it as my duty, and I take my personal time to reflect, and I feel very connected to that gravesite in the last month and a half. And on a very personal note, my father's in there, and he's a marked grave. They're not all unmarked. And my dad personally did attend the Maryville Residential School, and when I'm there, I feel like I'm honoring the survivors. So it's absolutely an honor and an obligation. The feelings part of it, I think I've talked about it so much that I could handle a lot of questions and stories about it. It just it's a very simple but complicated story, and I'm very cautious of when I tell somebody something, how they're going to react. I more focus on my audience when I'm there.